Weird texts, right? Yeah, we like John 3:16, but all the stuff around it gets kind of weird. And then we have this reference to the snake story, snakes biting heels, raise a bronze serpent. Yeah, it gets strange. So, fortunately, I'm going to solve it all right now. Because you see, I am a problem solver. When I am struggling, suffering, or see someone I care about struggling or suffering, my mind immediately goes towards devising a plan to get out of that suffering or struggle. If there was a problem, yeah, I'll solve it. Check out the hook while my DJ revolves it. I promise that Pastor Melissa and I have not been planning a bunch of 90s references for our Lenten sermons. The last thing I want to do when there is a problem is to leave it unsolved, to just sit with it. Not being able to take action, fix the situation, get out of the suffering infuriates me. It makes me feel miserable, worthless, powerless. Because as a problem solver, I define myself fundamentally by what I do, not by who I am. I am someone who can solve people's problems, and therefore I am worthy. But this form of self-identification allows for no satisfaction, no comfort, no calm, no peace. Because as anyone who has had to maintain a house or work a job or do homework or just, live on earth knows, the problems keep coming and they don't stop coming. And every solution to a problem usually just ends up creating more problems down the line. So my worthiness is never a sure thing. And then I wonder why I'm so anxious all the time. Because for all my Lutheran cred, I forget the central emphasis of Lutheran theology, our dependency on grace to define us. We confess that we are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. We are not defined by our actions, actually. We are defined by the free gift of grace that Jesus gives freely. We are not defined by what we do or by the problems that we solve. We are defined by the problems that we cannot solve. Because the truly subtle and devastating reality of sin is the way that it robs us of our personhood and turns us into problems. Sin presents itself to us as a problem that we should be able to solve and forces us into an all or nothing competition where either we solve sin, fix sin, erase sin, conquer sin, or it gets to conquer us. If we can't overcome it ourselves, then it overcomes us and we become defined as a problem. Just another of the many problems of sin. And what happens when we apply the same miserable formula to the other people in our lives whom we see sin, because they're human, who are just like us, unable to free themselves from sin? Well, they become problems as well. By manifesting itself as a problem to be solved, sin manages to twist reality, to convince us that we are problems and that everyone else who fails to be perfect are also problems, thereby breaking our relationship with others, with ourselves, and with God. By defining us all as problems, when the truth, the reality of the world that God has made is that we are not problems, we are people. And people are never problems. Evil is real. Sin is real. Problems are real. But people are not problems. We are people. If the lie of sin is that we are problems rather than people, then the truth of the gospel is that people are people who are never problems, period. But to believe in the kind of grace that promises that we are defined by our belovedness and not by our sin in a dreadfully sinful world requires remarkably strong boundaries. And so in our text today, we see Jesus set two remarkably strong boundaries for God and for ourselves to guide us toward our identity as beloved children of God. First, in John 3:17, Jesus says that the human one, the Messiah, was not sent into the world to condemn the world, but so that the world might be saved through its Savior. From the beginning of creation, God's purpose all the time, both from creation through Jesus, God's boundary is that people are not to be treated as problems. God's intent for Jesus is not condemnation. The reality of sin does not change our belovedness. Sin does not change our identity to God. God does not condemn. Jesus was sent specifically so that people would not be condemned as problems of sin, but lifted up as beloved children of God. And remember this boundary. For we live in a world that's filled with condemnation, where specific people are targeted and condemned in God's name, where it's all too easy to condemn ourselves for failing to be perfect. But in this, God declares that God's truest self did not come into the world to condemn, but to save. So if anyone uses the name of God to condemn, remember that God set a boundary from the beginning of creation that no human being is a problem. For God's intent is that people experience the fullness of God's love. The second boundary that Jesus sets to guide us towards our belovedness in the midst of sin is just as strong but more complex, and requires us to get into the nature of grace and belief. For in a world too quick to condemn, our attention is probably drawn to that second half of the gospel passage where Jesus talks about belief and condemnation and being in the light and the dark and moving into the truth and all that stuff. And to our modern reception, belief and condemnation, those can sound like opposites. But to these concerns, I would like to inquire what grace is revealed to be in this passage. For these verses are not meant to be proof texts, but revelations of divine love. And I would be curious to hear what you believe grace is revealed to be in John chapter 3, or the snake story in Numbers if you really want to take a stab at it. But as I have been sitting with this passage over this week, in the midst of many problems and far too much sin, I have been led to believe that grace is attention. In the ridiculously weird passage from Numbers that Jesus refers to in the gospel, what is it that stops the plague of snake bites? It is not calling someone to solve the problems of snakes. It's not people needing to be punished or changed or solved. It's attention. Specifically giving mutual attention, looking, seeing, remembering God's presence, God's abundance. God giving human attention, or giving humans attention, and God desiring humans to give God and other humans abundant attention in return. In John 3:16, we hear that wonderful promise that God has given humans attention, that God looked at the world and fell in love. That God beheld the world that God made, and God said, I want to live in that world, be fully present in that world, give attention to the people of this world, give attention to their feelings, their needs, their hopes. I want to give these people the full attention of divine love that is life everlasting. And while we could try to philosophically examine the distinction between condemnation and belief in the latter half of this passage, I believe that the emotion and the grace within Jesus' words is the desire for people to respond to the incredible gift of attention that God gives the whole world freely, abundantly, irresponsibly. The gift of grace manifests when God looks at you, gives you attention. God is so filled with love for you, falls in love with you all over again, that no amount of sin can define you as anything other than a person worthy of the fullness of divine love and attention. God gives you attention, and by grace you have been saved. But that gift of grace is unleashed, fully experienced, when we respond to God's abundant attention with mutuality. When we accept that we are worthy of God's attention, that we are not a problem, but a person, a beloved child of God, and embrace that God's attention is freely given to the entire world, that grace abounds, then when we do not withhold attention, treating it like a scarcity, but give attention so abundantly to ourselves, to each other, to God, because that attention is the grace, the love that Jesus lived to share, that Jesus died to set free, and that Jesus rose to unleash upon the earth. Our reality is abundant love that calls us to give abundant attention to ourselves, our God, our neighbor. This is the second boundary that Jesus sets in this passage that guides us to our true identity as people and not problems, the boundary of mutuality. God does not condemn, and God expects a mutual attention for grace to abound. God desires attention for all of God's self, the God who is God, the God who is the world, the God who is every one of us, and the God who dwells within us. For grace to abound, for love to overcome every sin, for our identity as children of God to flourish, to be forever secure in love, we need these boundaries. We do not condemn, and we respond to the mutual attention of our loving Creator. In these past weeks, I've had the opportunity to give a lot more people a lot more attention than I am used to giving. Some of you know that members of our community have suffered terribly at the hands of evil and sin. They have not been treated as people but as problems, and have had horrible injustice forced upon them by gravely unhealthy systems of the world, and have been hurt in ways I did not know were possible. This has demolished my problem-solving persona because there's no way for this problem to be solved. In the midst of this tragedy, I have witnessed members of this community show up to give attention. Not problem solving, not fixes for what cannot be fixed, but the grace of attention, the gift of mutuality. It has not been a cure for pain. It has not erased or overcome sin, but it has allowed love to endure. By upholding God's boundaries, by refusing to condemn one another and instead giving each other mutual divine attention, new life rises. The capacity this community has expressed to give attention to pain has astonished me, transformed me. I will confess that in the past 3 weeks, my theology, my faith, my sense of who God is and who people are has changed. Because belief transforms when we give mutual attention and refuse to condemn. Grace, transformative grace, has manifested in this community as people have heeded this call to follow God's boundaries, to treat people not as problems, but as people, to practice mutuality by giving attention abundantly. And yet, it's hard. It hurts. It's painful. Just this past Monday, I was struggling in the midst of giving a lot more attention than I was used to giving, and I was feeling stressed and strung out and overwhelmed. And fortunately, Clara, my spouse, wisely called me out for neglecting myself, for neglecting the attention that I owed myself. She quoted the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, instructing me that if I cannot give God 10 minutes of every day, then I need to give an hour. Yeah, there we go. I did this week. And I was shocked by how much the simple act of attention contributed to feeling loved and feeling worthy of love. It was emotional, it was overwhelming, but I realized how much I believed in God only after I realized how angry I was at God, how frustrated I was with God, how hurt. But giving that attention, that was something. It allowed for love to return. It allowed for grace to manifest and to survive. It's so easy in this world to operate on models of scarcity where it feels like our attention is always owed somewhere else. We are rarely allowed to be attentive to ourselves, much less attentive to others, even less attentive to God. But it is incredibly important to remember that God does not ask for attention for God's sake, but for ours. For God so loved the world. God sent Jesus that the world may be saved through the grace and the attention that Jesus gave to the world. Just like God, for that grace to manifest, we require boundaries. Not boundaries to be placed on grace, not limits to be placed on love, but boundaries to place upon our world to make sure that our priority is to give ourselves, each other, and God the attention that transforms the world from one caught in the problem-solving of sin into one where all people know that they are worthy of the fullness of divine love. Because the world is suffering. Countless are in pain at the indifference of systems to sin. There is great evil in the world, and we cannot necessarily stop it. But in knowing that we cannot free ourselves, we can live in the truth of grace by recognizing that God created this world to give it the full attention of true divine love. And change begins by giving attention to the God within us, the God in each other, and the God that exists beyond us. It's not an easy balance to strike. It may lead us into more pain, but it would be a lie to run away from this invitation to fall in love with the world, with the same love and attention that led God to send Jesus to save and sit with the whole world.